Hello and welcome to another special report with me, Alyssa Joseph. The legal battles involving MSR Media and players in the Citizenship by Investment program in St. Kitts Nevis have turned a revealing page. MSR Media and CEO Philippe Martinez in November 2023 was slapped with a defamation suit by Caribbean Galaxy owner Ying Jin and former Prime Minister Dr. Timothy Harris. In a press release issued Friday, 30th August 2024, it was reported that on August 29, Damian Kelsick, attorney for MSR Media, and Philippe Martinez filed the bank transactions from Bank of America, which were obtained by MSR Media's American lawyers through Section 1782 in the U.S. as part of their defense. The release says that for months, Caribbean Galaxy, Ying Jin, and Timothy Harris were engaged in a protracted legal battle in the U.S. against MSR Media and Martinez to prevent them from obtaining the U.S. dollar transactions from Bank of America. However, MSR Media and Philippe Martinez won this battle and are now in possession of the Bank of America records. On August 29, the Bank of America statements concerning Les Khan, Caribbean Galaxy, and Ying Jin were filed in the St. Kitts and Nevis court in reference to the defamation case. Les Khan was the CEO of the St. Kitts and Nevis Citizenship by Investment Unit from August 2016 to January 1, 2023. Khan was reportedly asked to resign from his position at the CIU by the then incoming administration of Prime Minister Terence Drew due to concerns about corruption. Khan tendered his resignation on December 5, 2022, and his resignation was effective on January 1, 2023. Subsequently, Khan began working at Galaxy Group in January 2023 as Chief Executive Officer of International Operations. The press release by MSR Media indicates that the records of Bank America transactions reveal incoming wires to Les Khan's U.S. company, LKCS LLC, in the total amount of $13,403,989.16. The majority of the income was received by Khan for the now controversial jail project in St. Kitts. These Bank of America transactions, according to MSR, raises several questions. 1. Les Khan received US dollar $320,752.92 from Caribbean Galaxy. And the company MSR asked, why did Caribbean Galaxy pay Khan's company while he was the head of the Citizenship by Investment Unit of St. Kitts and Nevis? MSR is also asking that Hong Kong Bai Sheng An Limited paid Les Khan $770,000 US dollars. Why, after Khan's departure from the CIU of St. Kitts and Nevis and his subsequent position as CEO of Caribbean Galaxy in St. Lucia, did the due diligence company Hong Kong Bank Sheng An Limited, set up and owned by Mr. Lee Musheng, Vice President of Caribbean Galaxy, pay Khan shortly after his departure from the CIU? MSR is also asking, Skipper Investment Macau Limited paid Les Khan US dollar $1,359,200. So why was Khan paid by Skipper Investment Macau Limited after his departure from the CIU? Who controls that company? The Accountant General, the CIU, paid Les Khan's company $10,518,188 US dollars for Khan's compensation as the CEO of the CIU. Khan's compensation contract was based largely on a bonus structure of successful applications. So MSR Media is asking, who are the officials that signed this very lucrative contract? In addition to the transactions summarized above, Khan transferred $435,848.24 US to himself, that is LKCS LLC, on May 5, 2020, using a Singapore bank account with United Overseas Bank Limited. The note says closing of account. MSR Media says it will provide the responses to these questions during the court case in St. Kitts and Nevis. MSR Media also says it looks forward to providing a similar legal response in due course to the defamation case filed by Dr. Timothy Harris. MSR Media will file to the court the relevant bank transactions for him, other officials, and entities to the St. Kitts and Nevis court. Well, MSR Media says for the past 2 years, it has investigated, revealed, and publicly denounced the illegal underselling of citizenship by investment units at prices well below the legally mandated rates, allowing for corrupt actors to corner the market and provide kickbacks to government officials who allow these practices to persist. CEO Philip Martinez insists that his fight, particularly the RICO case, is not just aimed at recouping monies lost on his investment in St. Kitts due to bad practices in the CBI, but to also end illegal practices in the CBI programs across the board. To help break down some of the issues beyond the MSR Media lawsuit, I spoke with an industry expert for insight. Here's that interview recorded August 2nd, 2024. But what exactly is the CIP? How does it really work? Lots of people seem not to really fully understand the CIP and simply reduce it to the selling of passports. While that may be the end of it, individuals receive that citizenship, there is so much more that goes into the business, the function of the business, and so much more involved as where the significance of that business is concerned, implications, consequences that may be therein. We want to be able to get into all of that to give you a very, as best as possible, comprehensive understanding of what exactly is the Citizenship by Investment Program. I have asked for help from an individual who has decades of experience in the Citizenship by Investment Program, as well as not just as a player in the program, but now fully assessing and reporting on it as a financial crime specialist. And of course, he's an individual with a very colorful past. And perhaps it places him best suited to give us a full breakdown of how things really work. I speak of Mr. Kenneth Reshock, and I hope I got that last name correct. He'll correct me if I didn't get it right. Kenneth Reshock, I want to thank you so much for joining me on this special report. Welcome.
Thank you, Lisa. It's good to be here, and it's good to talk about CIP because it seems to be what's on everybody's mind at the moment. My experience with CIP goes back to the very beginning. Turn the clock back 40 years to 1984, when St. Kitts and Nevis, newly independent a year prior, started putting together a program to not only award citizenship to foreign investors for the purposes of raising capital for the country, but also to give them that prized passport, which of course, as a British Commonwealth nation, allows them entry not only into the UK, but also into all of the other former Commonwealth possessions around the globe. It also happened in the future to give them visa-free access to the European Union, all 30 countries, without the necessity of going through the expense of a passport or visa qualification.
And
now,
so the importance of the Citizenship by Investment Program, you mentioned it there. Of course, it brings great economic benefit to the islands that are involved in it. But at the same time, and I'm going to call you Ken, at the same time, Ken, there are some very troubling issues surrounding the Citizenship by Investment programs. And for years, the programs have been dogged. They've been bedeviled with claims of and allegations of corruption, fraud, money laundering, and the list goes on. I want to ask you about the CIP. What about the CIP, whether its structure, that makes it it places it right at the center of such allegations? What about the CIP and its structure that lends to that? Can you explain that to us?
Yes, ma'am. Well, the program is only as good as the people who are operating it. And history tells us that the 5 East Caribbean states, which are all operating a CIP program, have unfortunately a rather sword in history of quality and quantity. Remember that all of the individuals who are applying for these applications and citizenships must pass a due diligence inquiry. They have to prove who they are and the source of their funds and the source of their wealth. Anybody who comes from a criminal background is not acceptable by law. So the due diligence program is the primary means by which you separate the wheat from the chaff, and unfortunately, all of the countries to a lesser and a greater extent have fallen down with their ability to monitor and vet the applicants.
So walk us through what the structure of such a program is. Give us the players. So of course you have an investor, and who are the individual players involved in the program?
Well, in each of these 5 states, the CIP program is operated by a unit which may or may not be independent from the government itself. It's run by a number of government officials, public functionaries, who of course are earned and paid a salary. And within that group, there'll be a processing section. There'll be, to a lesser degree, a section to vet the individuals. And then there'll be the administrative people who will actually be processing the applications, calling them up for review, then approving or disapproving them. But remember this, on the outside, you're going to have one or more due diligence entities, whether they be in the United States, in the United Kingdom, or whether they be somewhere further afield. And it's up to that external due diligence entity to vet and qualify the clients.
So in the marketplace, so an investor, and he has those shares to sell, who does the investor engage? Promoters, market agents? Break that down for us so that we get an understanding of who operates in the marketplace.
Okay, well, here's the problem, Lisa. These people, by and large, are not qualified professionals. They're not lawyers and accountants. They are salesmen. They run CBI or CIP consultancies. They could be local. They could be in your own country. They could be as far afield as Dubai or any one of a number of high-profile and high-risk nations where those individuals are offering to sell that product to people who cannot otherwise get visas to come in anywhere. So here's the crux of the matter from the beginning is if you don't have professionals who have licenses and who are therefore accountable, it's pretty much a seller's market in that these individuals have been known at times to make promises that frankly they can't keep, and there isn't anybody who is basically trying to keep them honest, because remember, all the way back in the East Caribbean, what kind of leverage other than canceling their ability to sell the passports does somebody in government have? Therefore, you have a rather freewheeling society. I won't say that they're all trying to sell ice boxes to the Eskimos, but by and large, it's a number of results-oriented salesmen that are out there making promises and not always giving full disclosure to the applicants. That's the very beginning of the process.
And of course, here in the individual islands, then you have the home-based individuals who must get, who must be licensed by the government to operate. So the processing agents here, attorneys and so forth, who must be licensed in order now to operate. But you say that in almost loosely, Ken, that while you have the individuals in the marketplace, those marketers, agents, etc., and they may be selling ice to the Eskimo, as you put it, and so they make all sorts of promises in order to make the sale. And some of those promises would include discounting the rate or the price of the product that they're selling, the citizenship that they're selling. And you say very almost glibly, I think, that what can we do in the Eastern Caribbean except that the government can revoke or pull or reject. I think that's a lot. And if the government, were doing that en masse, then wouldn't that be sending a message to the market and to the players in the market that their behavior is not going to be accepted?
Well, that happens to a much lesser extent than it should be to keep these people honest. There's in many cases an inadequate amount of disclosure to the applicants so that they can understand what are the pluses and the minuses, what are the consequences of obtaining the citizenship and passport, and sometimes later they find out there's a little bit of a crude awakening. Granted, the governments in the East Caribbean have the ability to somehow discipline the sales entities who are far afield, but in truth and in fact, the number of entities that are canceled are few and far in between.
Okay. Now, I mentioned your background, and I think we should speak about your background now, because as we will get deeper into the various issues of the CIP and how a CIP operates. You are or were a banking lawyer and turned money launderer and turned compliance officer specializing in enhanced due diligence and financial crime consultant. And you also wrote your life story and autobiography called The Laundryman. So, Kenneth, I want you to share with us, how did all of this in your life happen? Take us back and as concisely as you possibly can to give us an understanding of how you moved from being a banking lawyer into money laundering. How did that happen?
Well, Lisa, professionals don't wake up one day and say, well, today I'm going to be a career criminal. By way of background, before I became a bank lawyer, I was a soldier in the Vietnam War, which most people will understand was America's longest war. And a lot of the casualties are not necessarily the individuals who sustained battle wounds. A large percentage of the individuals who served in Vietnam came back to civilian life and I'm embarrassed to say committed crimes far in excess of the national average. And it's a combination of the brutality of war and what we call agent, of course, is a toxic item that was used to spray on the jungles and which unfortunately had its impact on most of us that served there. That's not me excusing me for my conduct. I think that in the past 30 years since I stopped being a money launderer, I have testified before the U.S. Congress, I've worked with law enforcement, and by and large what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to make sure that the world can catch people doing what I used to do, and at the same time that the banking and private sector understands what the dangers are because of my unique perspective and can stop money launderers in real time in their tracks.
So how does the corruption that we've been hearing for so long, as I indicated, about the CIPs across all islands that have the CIP programs, how does that corruption infect the islands?
Well, for 95% of the people who are applying for passports, this doesn't affect them because they're legitimate. They happen to live in a country where it's very inconvenient for them to travel around the world. They may be very affluent. They may decide that they want to move their family to a safer place. They may have a reason. However, there's a very small percentage of people who happen to be part of a criminal class whose job is to get the passport so they can use, abuse, and lose it. That basically means what they're going to do is they're going to buy a passport, buy a citizenship, and they're going to use it to commit crimes in the UK or the European Union or somewhere else where they can get visa-free access. So here's a very small criminal minority. And remember that this minority will do anything to get these passports. They will lie, cheat, and steal. They will bribe government officials some of whom make very small salaries. Some of these individuals may unfortunately have family problems, they may have their own difficulties, and they may desperately need additional funds. They may be vulnerable. Others are just greedy. I don't want to point out that the level of corruption in the East Caribbean is unfortunately much higher than it should be. That happens in most of the countries of the developing world. It's a sin that is only going to disappear when economies improve. But what's happened here is that a small group of criminal individuals have partnered up with a small group of corrupt government people and functionaries to dirty the programs from the very beginning. I was involved when I was a money launderer. I was offered passports candidly from the initial country that was offering them, and it was a no questions asked issue where I could buy passports for narcotics traffickers and even kingpins. And when I questioned as to whether or not they would be approved, I was assured that it would not be an issue. I know that in a number of jurisdictions, bribes are paid under the table. Bribes and kickbacks occur. Why? Because those are needed to facilitate some of these criminal transactions. That's just a very small percentage. However, it has infected the programs in all 5 countries.
Well, I heard you earlier on there, and I just want to say that Ken, you said that, our economies, they're small, and the corruption may very well be as a result of that. But even in the large-scale economies, we still have corruption going on. But I want to ask about the checks and balances, because certainly in the last 10 years, we've seen a really intense push by whether it be the Europe, the Americans, ensuring that anti-money laundering legislation is enacted. Some of it so draconian that it has really affected how we here in the islands conduct banking business, to the point that it almost makes it impossible for the ordinary man to even go in and have a bank account open with ease. And so the checks and balances have been put in place. Would you agree with that? And if it is in place and these things are still happening, can you explain to us why it doesn't seem to be working and catching the individuals at the point that it should?
Yes, ma'am. Well, first of all, you need to look at the history of the region. The 1980s were unfortunately a period in which there was an extraordinary amount of money laundering in the offshore Caribbean tax havens. That doesn't mean it's every island and every country. However, a number of them were heavily involved in allowing the proceeds of crime to be laundered, and this unfortunately increased the risk levels from the banks in the United Kingdom, the European Union, and most importantly, the United States. Now, let me add an intensifying factor. From the very beginning, the species, the currency of the realm for the CIP programs was not the pound sterling, it was the United States dollar. Why? Well, think about it. The economies of the East Caribbean are frankly tied directly to the United States because of import and export. Remember, the Eastern countries can't produce 90% of what they consume. Therefore, they must have a close relationship with U.S. importers and exporters. Well, U.S. banks, as the years went by, became more and more under the gun with respect to anti-money laundering compliance. And, of course, we come up with something called de-risking. That means that when the banks have a very high level of compliance required, that they look to the banks in the Caribbean to maintain the same level of AML. If that doesn't happen, then they worry about whether or not they can continue to correspondent bank accounts with those countries. And that's where we are for the past, let's say, 5 years. American banks are scared to death that they are unwittingly processing the proceeds of crime because the banks in the East Caribbean, to some extent, are inconsistent about their anti-money laundering. That's not to say that they all are, and some of them, frankly, have very good programs. However, most of the banks in the United States fear huge billion-dollar fines from our regulators. Therefore, they have to exercise an extreme amount of due diligence to ensure that the bank they deal with is doing their job.
And so you're saying that within the Caribbean, the due diligence process at the banks are not strong enough? Is that what you're saying? Not rigid enough?
Yes, ma'am. No, that's definitely that is definitely the case. And ma'am, you need to understand that there's a financial aspect to this. Compliance is expensive. It requires experienced people that have not only education but training. And assembling a team like that in banks of varying sizes in the East Caribbean is a huge job. And it's not always accomplished successfully. How will a bank pay for its compliance department if its profits are minimal? There are all these issues that unfortunately work against a bank in the East Caribbean for having what we call banking best practices, or that is compliance on the level of a bank in the United States or the UK.
I want to ask then, what is the point, the key point, the first point that ought to flag that something is wrong within this whole system? So is the compliance officer the first key point?
Well, the compliance officer, when it comes to international banks located in the Caribbean, he is the frontline person. In the CIP program, of course, it's the external due diligence company. And if either of those people isn't doing their job to the level that an American bank wants, then we have a problem.
But over the years, we've not heard, certainly not within my memory, and you may have a different knowledge, we've not heard of any of the Eastern Caribbean banks where CIP operates of any issues regarding their policies, their compliance, their monitoring, whatever you want to term it. We've not heard of any instance where the banks have been called out on that, Ken, except in most recent there where we saw that the corresponding banking with Dominica and Bank of America seem to have been on shaky grounds, and we'll get to that discussion a little later. But as I said, just wanted to put that on record, that's certainly not within my knowledge that we've had any of the banks flagged. Certainly not anything that has been made public over the years. I do want to ask now about once the legislation and it makes provision for all of the things that need to happen and how it is supposed to happen. If something is flagged, what is done. But there are some new rules that have been proposed from FinCEN, the FinCEN rule, so for the risk assessment process. Can you explain that to us, and why is it that this new FinCEN rule has been proposed?
Well, FinCEN, the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, which is America's most primary regulator on money laundering and terrorist financing, has proposed to add an additional layer to anti-money laundering, and that is to actually force the banks to create a risk assessment unit, which will be on a continual basis and will be looking at the customers and clients and the transactions, not just when they open the account, but at all times in the future on a rotating basis to ensure that somebody who comes in and opens up a bank account doesn't wait 9 months and then decide to engage in a lot of suspicious transactions. Remember that in many cases, once a bank account has been established and due diligence is complete and that person has passed muster, the monitoring of those accounts is generally done on a very as-needed basis. What this new FinCEN rule does is it requires the bank to have a standalone risk management group who's just going to continually start looking at business, looking at transactions, so that somewhere down the road that some clever group of money launderers doesn't stay on the straight and narrow for a year and then show up next year moving all sorts of money and then closing their accounts and disappearing. It's an early warning system for the banks.
Now, the RICO case is alleging just what we're discussing, fraud, corruption, and money laundering. What is the effect of such claims within that RICO case?
The RICO case opened up the world of CIP to the entire global compliance world, whereas the connections, the encounters between CIP passports and banks in different parts of the world are occasional. They're not constant. However, the RICO case has now shown us that in at least two instances, that is in St. Kitts and in St. Lucia, that there was an ongoing corrupt program to sell passports at a discount through a bad actor, and as such, individuals who were definitely engaged in criminal activity and who've since been arrested and indicted in other places got those passports with a wink and a nod from a dysfunctional compliance program that was actually controlled by a Chinese company that was the vendor of the passports. So the RICO case has opened up some of the warts and the shortcomings, potential problems in the compliance programs, and it has showcased corruption which can appear below the waterline and which basically it's not available to be seen by the public, but is now going to be brutally apparent.
Now, the due diligence, when we speak about that, I want you to break it down for the ordinary person to understand, because you speak about the importance of the due diligence company. I spoke with the MSR CEO, Philippe Martinez, not too long ago, and he also underscored the importance of the due diligence company and completely alarmed at the fact that the due diligence company being used by Caribbean Galaxy is actually Chinese owned, and not just Chinese owned, but linked in ownership somehow to Caribbean Galaxy. So encapsulate for us the importance of a due diligence company first, and then we'll move on into the other areas.
A due diligence entity has to be completely independent, legitimate, experienced, and it has to be in a position to reject applicants solely based upon the facts and the evidence. A due diligence company generally is manned and staffed by people who have a serious amount of experience and training, as well as traditional education, and those individuals are tasked with looking into the background and the life of an applicant to determine what his financial issues are, whether or not there is a legal source of his income and of his business, and as such, whether or not he represents a low or high risk of being involved in criminal activity. That's a very simplified form of explaining how it works, but by and large, it's looking into the background of an applicant, both financially, professionally, and personally, to ensure that he's engaged in legitimate commerce, or that he has come by his assets and income through legal means, and as such, it's safe and would be a low-risk opportunity to render him a citizenship.
And so a compromised and I use that word, in quotations there, compromised due diligence company, certainly can wreak havoc in the industry, correct?
Not only that, and not only is it, a situation where it's a conflict of interest, because in this case, the Chinese vendor of the passports was itself owning what purports to be a due diligence company, but that due diligence company, to my understanding, isn't involved anywhere in doing due diligence for anybody else and isn't out there in the marketplace, and sounds to me suspiciously like it is merely a front by which the Chinese vendor can then approve all these passports 100% of the time. So it's a nightmare to have a fox in the henhouse, which is what it is. There's no independent gatekeeper here stopping criminal elements from getting passports.
And so the shining of the light, really, because this really just came to light as a result of the filing of the RICO case. And, we have heard many individuals say, well, what exactly is the complaint by MSR in its filing of the RICO case about St. Lucia and St. Kitts' programs? But you say that the filing of the RICO case should not be underestimated. Why is that?
Well, remember, where there's smoke, there's fire. And if in one small instance with one Chinese passport vendor, there is this huge amount of corruption, that means that all of the other stakeholder programs all have to be examined to ensure that there's not corruption, frankly, everywhere. The point is that the RICO program, the RICO complaint, explains that when discounted passport sales take place, that other people who are stakeholders in the same government programs aren't going to get the same applicants, because why should you spend $200,000 for a passport over here when you can get one for $80,000 over there? So that damages everybody else involved in the program who's legitimate.
At the end of the day, there is the very, very, very crucial point of national security at the center of all of this. And we have seen over the last few months individuals who have been arrested by the U.S. authorities, and they are holders of passports from St. Kitts and Nevis. And these individuals have been arrested and charged for money laundering. And it has raised some serious eyebrows, certainly, in law enforcement as a result of that. Explain to us about the threat to the national security, and maybe to the U.S. We look at there first.
Well, the nightmare for compliance is that the allegations are that the Chinese due diligence company created counterfeit and bogus identities for these individuals to get their passports, which means that a compliance officer in the United States is not getting the real name of the individual. Now, what does that mean? That means that if you have successfully hidden your identity, you're not going to show up on any database of high-risk people, and the odds of you completing a crime are increasingly high. So when we have a dirty, call it what it is, a dirty compliance firm, a dirty due diligence firm, muddying the water for everybody else, not only are money launderers going to get these passports, not only are terrorist financiers going to do so, but spies and intelligence agents from hostile nations will be able to operate with impunity. In my opinion, the national security threat to the United States and indeed to Western Europe is extreme, because now we're going to have intelligence agents from China and who knows what other enemies of the West are going to be able to employ those passports to get into these countries without a visa to engage in espionage or industrial espionage, to commit terrorist acts, and to do God only knows what. So therefore, the national security threat trumps everything else with respect to what happens when you have somebody with a passport under an alias that cannot be penetrated because it's been put together by a due diligence company that has frankly been in bed with criminals.
And over in Europe, we have seen such a strong stance being taken there, with the Commission already saying, hey, the slightest issues that we will come across, we are now going to simply immediately put an end to any CBI or CIP program that seems to pose a risk to us over in Europe. And in your blogs, and I read this, you are very strong on the belief that it is about time that the EU puts an end to the visa-free travel for the EU for holders of citizenship by investment passports. Why are you so strong on that, as opposed to maybe let's try and tighten it as much as we can? Why a complete end, Ken?
Well, it's the carrot and the stick. The only way that we can solve our problems with CIP in the Caribbean is we have to have meaningful and 100% reform of these programs. You have to scare people straight. If a CBI jurisdiction was to lose its EU and UK visa privileges, I guarantee you that the CIP unit in that country would immediately clean up and change its program so as to be readmitted, because it then had acceptable guidelines. Sometimes the stick is the only thing that will work, and as such, the loss of visa-free privileges is probably going to be the way in which we can actually get meaningful and total reform of the programs. By just threatening to remove those visa-free privileges, you may not see the level of reform that is necessary. These programs provide money for countries that desperately need that for their budgets, for their population, for economic growth, but they can't get it unless the program is actually going to be clean 100%. And to do that, we have to, unfortunately, we have to push these jurisdictions into meaningful and total reform. Why not make them start right now and say, well, if you can come up with a program that we can accept, then you can have your visa-free privileges back. That, in my humble opinion,
so is that what we've seen happening with Dominica? Let me just get in here. Because last year, in 2023, we saw Dominica's visa-free access there being revoked by the UK. So is that what happened in that respect?
Well, you remember that as we discussed in the very beginning, the 5 EC countries that are selling CIP passports have a rather inconsistent and spotty record of approving passports for people from high-risk countries. And they have histories, these are dark histories in their past, about allowing, unfortunately, people from the Middle East or people from certain countries that are deemed to be supporters of terrorism to get these passports. And there comes a time when a European country such as the UK will say, that's it, no more. You need to change your program, and the only way to do it is I need to, cut the tap off right now, and you want to improve your program. The short answer is that's got to be one of the major reasons why the government of the United Kingdom cut off visa-free access, and I'm sure they're hoping and planning that somebody will come up with a banking best practices program in Dominica that will satisfy them. Remember, even if a bank was to lose its correspondent accounts in the U.S., that's not the end of the world. They can change their program and be readmitted. Same thing with the visa programs. So it's not curtains or the end of the world for the East Caribbean if some of these privileges disappear, because they can be reinstated.
And that brings me to the memorandum of understanding that was signed with the CBI countries. Certainly signed at the behest of the EU. The EU was very strong on wanting them to agree and to harmonize how the CBI or CIP programs would function henceforth. And you believe that this is a nod in the right direction?
Well, it definitely helps, because, frankly, there was so much cheating going on for so many years that uniformity, complying with your own laws, should be a given. There shouldn't have to be an exception. And remember that all of these countries had specific minimum prices in their statutes. So there would be no reason to have a vendor in Dubai or a vendor in somewhere, Singapore, trying to sell it at half price or less than half price and cheating the rest of the legitimate vendor community. I think that the sale at anything less than the legitimate price creates a race to the bottom, which didn't do anything but hurt the program and result in, frankly, less income for the countries that desperately need it. Let's remember, who are the beneficiaries here? The beneficiaries are the populations of countries who need to have their budgets fortified by the CIP money. And when people are playing fast and loose with the prices and people are cheating, that's just going to discourage people from going to a particular region and getting those passports. Remember, it's not just the East Caribbean. You can go in other places of the world and get a CIP passport, and maybe you won't have to deal with all of this craziness. So
but at the same time, while you're saying that, Ken, the EU is applying a whole lot of pressure on the other side of the world, where CIP passports, or the golden visa passports as they called, where they exist. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, has Cyprus stopped their program, or Malta as well is under a lot of pressure. So give us an idea, because you cover that region of the world extensively in your blogs. So can you give us an idea of what's happening with those golden visa passports on the other side of the globe?
Well, the problem, unfortunately, is fairly universal. The level of compliance in candidly all of the countries that offer the CIP passport is spotty at best. And you're right, Cyprus had a huge amount of corruption. It was exposed in the media, and the program is now defunct. The same thing in Bulgaria. In Malta, the European Commission has brought legal proceedings to terminate Malta's program because they don't feel that it measures up to their standards. And remember that somebody obtaining a citizenship in another country should have some connection or ties to that country. That, unfortunately, generally doesn't happen. Somebody is buying a passport for one reason and one reason only. They may be legitimate, most of them are. They just would like to travel to Paris and London without having to go through a 6-month visa process. They would like to take their family to some other part of the world to live. They would like to get their children educated. Those are all perfectly normal desires, and we, frankly, are trying to support them. But there's this tiny little percentage of people that are using these passports for crime, and there's a small percentage of people who are involved in the governments who are taking advantage by receiving bribes and kickbacks to sell the passports with a wink and a nod to those criminals. So there's got to be a means through which all of these programs will reform in time, and which they will go from being bad boys to being respected around the world by the banking world and the banking community, and where they will be trusted to send in their application money to an American bank. And the bankers in the U.S. will say, well, compliance is done by a third party. It's legitimate. There isn't any serious corruption going on in the project, in the program, and all of these construction programs are being completed, and they're fine. But right now, the whole industry is in a state of transition because of the exposure of all of the corruption. Which is, the corruption's got to stop, and true reform has to begin. And we hope that the RICO case will start to be a means of kickstarting people into changing. Now, the good news, of course, is that in Dominica, they started canceling the passports of illegally discounted or unsuitable applicants. That's a step in the right direction. It's time for the other 4 countries in the EC to do the same thing, and it's time for them to get a consistently legitimate compliance program, and it's time for them to clean up their act.
Well, we are hearing more and more positive steps towards that direction, Ken, because we did when Prime Minister drew over in St. Kitts Nevis, he had promised that they would form and name a continuing international due diligence unit to monitor financial crimes that may be committed in Europe. So they're opening that. We've also now heard just a few days ago that the Citizenship by Investment unit over there in St. Kitts has now been made independent, so it's not part of the government anymore, so it will have a large degree of autonomy. And also, most importantly, after my last interview with Philippe Martinez, there was word that the government over in St. Kitts and Nevis is now commissioning a review, if you will, of the passports that were sold under the former administration, the former Timothy Harris administration. And so there is a complete review taking place, even though there is a judicial review case in the court. The government has signaled that there is a review that is going to be commissioned and will be undertaken. So these are very positive steps in the right direction. And also over in St. Kitts Nevis, there has been such strong anti-corruption legislation that has been introduced regarding the CIP over there. And also there was a repeal of the benefactor, public good, I believe it's called, legislation there over in St. Kitts, which is the option under which Caribbean Galaxy was commissioned to do the jail project. So there was a repeal of that legislation, new legislation coming in, giving more definition to how all of that option under that legislation is supposed to function. So it would seem, Kenneth, that there is a lot of work that is going to be happening. We haven't heard much of what's going to be happening in St. Lucia by way of legislation. We still do not have a full understanding of what the infrastructure option is, what it is exactly that the players in the market, what are they selling, how they're selling it. So we don't have that. It's not on the website of the CIU. And so we are awaiting from the government something more precise on that matter. But I want to say to you, Kenneth, that it would seem that even though you go through all of that trouble, they can just simply decide to pull the plug. And I am saying so against the background of what happened with Vanuatu, to get the pronunciation correct. They had been working with the EU for a number of years to really straighten out its program. And it would seem just when they put in a unit, they did certain things, they made certain adjustments. The EU just said, it's okay, forget about all what you're doing. And they decided to indefinitely suspend the visa access to that nation. So, damn if you do, damn if you don't. Is that what's really happening? And is it the situation, as you explained, that is just get rid of those programs altogether?
Well, the thing is that these programs represent the public good for countries that desperately need need to modernize. Now, in the Vanuatu matter, while they did try valiantly to upgrade their program, they tried to bring it up to a level where it would be acceptable. The problem is this, that whether they are bankers in the United States or government officials in Western Europe, you're going to have to go a little bit further than internal reform. Candidly, to clean up your own house. Right now, where without a third party, that is to say, external due diligence, what's going on far afield, because they can't just pick up tomorrow and audit a CIP in a faraway country in 2 hours, because they're going to an independent third party to ensure that due diligence is done on a level to the same degree that an American bank would do to itself. If that can be accomplished, then the correspondent banks in the U.S. will have no more complaints, because they know that they can go and audit the local. Let's just assume, for the sake of argument, that a third party due diligence firm is reputations and who can't be bribed or bought or anything like that, and they have the authority to reject unsuitable applicants, and their word is final. There's not going to be any issue about possible corruption abroad. There won't be any issue about somebody trying to change things for somebody's financial benefit. Therefore, while I respect the Vanuatu situation, I think they didn't go far enough, and I think that the East Caribbean states have to take it one step more, in that they need to do applications are approved by a third party who is bulletproof.
But as we close, Kenneth, it's something that keeps at the back of my mind. When we speak about the national security, we often speak of it in terms of the US, we speak of it in terms of Canada, in terms of the EU. But there is a national security risk to the islands themselves right here in the Caribbean basin. Your thoughts on that?
Well, I've been knocking around to the Caribbean for 40 years. I first showed up in the late 1970s for legitimate reasons, and then a decade frankly, as a career criminal. But for the past 30 years, it's been basically to catch crime where it appears, and unfortunately, money laundering knows no national boundaries. If you look at what's been going on in the East Caribbean over the past 5 years, you have seen a very disturbing program and the CIB program. Both of those are evidence of, I would call, Chinese intrusion and interference. And as such, if a country in the East Caribbean borrows a huge amount of money and is unable to pay it back, or if a country in the East Caribbean finds that its CIP program is infected with Chinese influence, there's a national security problem. One only needs to go over to Antigua and see this huge Chinese sphere of influence, a Chinese entity that's being created, which will have its own security, passport, airplanes, airlines. It's going to have its own port system. These are, frankly, very troubling intrusions into East Caribbean sovereignty that I don't really know where it's going to go, but it concerns me. And everybody who lives in the East Caribbean needs to look carefully to see what kind of foreign influence is going on in their country below the waterline, and what can they do to stop it?
Well, some may say that, we are sovereign nations. We are free to create alliances with whichever nations, individuals that we so desire. And also that there's never been any incident here in the Caribbean that nothing has been unearthed. And so at the end of the day, this is just geopolitics being played out by the U.S. Because the U.S. and China, as we know, have had very tense relations for maybe longer than I've been alive. And so this is just another instance of the U.S. trying to flex its muscles over China. What do you say to that?
Well, when you look at geopolitics, you have to understand that China and the United States and China and the West have a very long history, and as such, it is an adversarial relationship which they must deal with, not just indirectly. Caribbean, or whether that they're bent on creating undue influence, is something that many decades very concerned about any foreign influence in the Western Hemisphere. Frankly, for 200 years, we've taken the position that there should be no foreign influence. 200 years ago, we kept European countries out. When foreign entities make overtures into the not give you an exact answer as to where this is going, but if there are and foreign sources, and they're done on an even-handed level, and there are economic benefits, then by all means they should proceed. But if they end up being where one party is taking undue advantage of the other, such as shown up in the Belt and Road programs that China has done in Asia, concerned about what might happen in the future.
All right, I want to say thank you very much. We'll leave it there. We seem to have been having a little difficulty with the connection, and I hope that as we continue following MSR and its quest, that we will have another opportunity to speak, Kenneth. Kenneth Rijak, he is a financial crime specialist, and he has a blog. Kenneth, can you just tell us how we can read your blog?
Well, it's Kenneth Rijak's Financial Crime Blog, and if you just go on Google and type in my last name, Rijak, you'll be right there.
All right. Thank you very much. And as you heard him say there, I think we had just had a little bit of a break. If you were to go Google Rijak, and his blog will pop up, Rijock, so that you can read for yourself to see what his analysis is, and so that you can have the information right at your fingertips as well. I want to thank you so much, and I do hope that the information has been useful to you. Thank you for joining me on this special report. I'm Melissa Joseph. See you next time.